So we will continuing with our next speaker. Our next speaker is His Grace Shruti Kirti Prabhu. I will give a brief introduction about Prabhuji, and we have 5 speakers today. So second is Shruti Kirti Prabhu. So everybody knows Shruti Kirti Prabhu. He joined in early days of Hare Krishna explosion. Soon he was the secretary of Srila Prabhupada, and he would travel with Srila Prabhupada to various countries. He noted the details of his travels, and thus he is one of the greatest speakers on Srila Prabhupada's pastimes. Yeah, Prabhuji has compiled a lot of books on pastimes of Srila Prabhupada. He has been widely preaching everywhere in the world, fulfilling Srila Prabhupada's mission. He is based in United Kingdom. So we will hear the remembrances and service in separation by Shruti Kirti Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimad Bhakti Swami Tirobhav Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pachani Nirvisesa Sanjivadi Paspita Desakani. His Holiness Bhakti Charu Maharaj Ki Jai. So, of course, I first met Maharaj in probably 1977 right here, Krishna Balaram Mandir. At the time I was temple president in Hawaii, and I came the end of August and I stayed for 2 weeks, which Srila Prabhupada was here, and I was helping Upendra Prabhu, who was his personal servant, one of his personal servants at the time, and Bhakti Charu Maharaj was here at that time. So that was my first meeting. Of course, I was very touched by who he was. He was, I'm sure, as you're going to hear again and again as people talk, he was such a gentleman, such a gentle soul, and very humble. He had so many qualities that I appreciated in Srila Prabhupada. Anyway, he was very kind to me, and he had no problem in having me help him engage in service and different things and cooking, like that. And then, of course, Prabhupada left shortly after that. I went back to Hawaii. And just to give some background, I was in Hawaii till 1980, then I was in Los Angeles till like 1983. And then by 1984, I had a wife and 3 children, so I wound up moving back to my home area. Had to get a place to rent, had to get a job. So it was at that time when I was outside of the protection of ISKCON, more or less. I was an hour away from any temple. And of course, that lifestyle, having a full-time job, going every day, not being near a temple, you find yourself gradually drying up. And the internet was, of course, just starting to boom by the late 80s, into the 90s. We were all on what was called AOL, America Online. And being on the internet, somehow or other I came across the fact that Prabhupada's centennial was coming in 1996. So it was 1995, and Bhakti Charu Maharaj, he was trying to organize a program to bring all of the, we say like the disconnected devotees back. You know, all these, my godbrothers, my godsisters, and others who had found themselves in similar situations to me for one reason or another. And he started this program for the centennial that he wanted to somehow reach out to all of his godbrothers, his godsisters, to see that they would be more involved in their devotional service, feel closer to Prabhupada's society, feel closer to Srila Prabhupada. And I don't know about anybody else, but myself, I took it as an opportunity I was, like I say, for a dozen years, I was pretty distant from the society, just going to the temple on special festival days and things like that. So it was kind of by his influence, by his pushing from afar, that I wound up coming to Vrindavan for 1996. And after over a dozen years of not coming to India, not being very involved in the society, that was the first step where I, again, got into more involved in Krishna consciousness. And more than that, it's when I began my writings, which about took 7 years, but later became a book. So that influence was very, very essential, was very important, and it had an effect on me, had just getting a taste again. So that was definitely an influence of Bhakti Charu Maharaj. And then, of course, after that, I was coming back to Vrindavan. I remember I was here 2000, 2001. Raghunatha Swami involved me in one of his programs here during Kartik. We went to Raval. I remember it was the first day of his pilgrimage. They had, like, at that time, 2001, 20 years ago, they had over a dozen buses all filled with the devotees. He had me speak the first day. So again, just that little bit of taste, it helps so much. And it's something that Maharaj, Bhakti Charu Maharaj, understood very well. So then we'll fast forward into 2010, between 2010 and 2020. I started probably a half a dozen times. I would go to Atlanta Temple, which they would have the Panihati Festival, which Jayapataka Maharaj made famous in different places, particularly Atlanta, where he would go to every year at that time. So because I was in the US and temple president, he would invite me to come and speak 1 or 2 days about Srila Prabhupada. So just in the last few years, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, again, seeking Mahiti, he was inviting me to come to Atlanta. And one of the other persons, the big name they would invite, was Bhakti Charu Maharaj, because now this time, Jayapataka Maharaj, he wasn't traveling as much. Huh? So since that community has a large Bengali community, so they would invite Bhakti Charu Maharaj. And so I was there for, not the last Panihati, but the 2 before that. I was there for Panihati Festival. And 2 years ago, I was there for the Janmashtami Festival. And Bhakti Charu Maharaj was there at both of those festivals. And we stayed next door to the temple in the guest house, and I was literally right next to him. We would take prasadam together downstairs. Him and whatever Prabhupada disciples were there, we would all have breakfast and lunch together. So it was a very nice atmosphere. And him and I, we always got along very well. I would imagine he got along with everyone very nicely. But we definitely, in some ways, we would speak the same language. He would talk about Srila Prabhupada so much, and in the classes he would talk about Prabhupada. Then I would get up and talk about Prabhupada, tell different pastimes and things. And I remember each time after the class, he would come up to me and he said the exact same thing each time. He'd say, that was amazing. He said, that was wonderful. He said, this class, he said, is so nice. So in that way, it was very encouraging. But he was also, just to hear about Prabhupada, he would become so inspired wherever it was coming from. We know his book has become one of the very sought-after books, how he talks about his own feelings, his emotions, and his service to Srila Prabhupada. And so as I mentioned, 1996, he kind of brought me in. And it started a very wonderful thing where more and more I became engaged in service. So one day, as we were waiting for lunch to be served, and he was sitting at the head of the table, Panchagoda Prabhu was there, Teja Prakash was there, I was there, one other devotee. All his godbrothers were there. And while we were waiting to be served, he said, I have an idea. And it just coming for now, this 125th anniversary, he realized it was coming, Prabhupada's anniversary of his appearance 125 years ago. And he said, what I want to do, he said, is in the U.S., because now he was going to the U.S. He had that place in Florida, a farm-like community outside Orlando. And he said, I want to have a program, he said, for my godbrothers and godsisters. He said, I want them all to come. He said, I want everybody to be invited. He said, we have to figure out where to do it. He said, we can all get together for a week or so. And again, give everybody the opportunity just to engage in service and somehow reconnect. He said, wherever they are, whatever they're doing, however long they may be away, he said, let's get them here. He said, it will pay all the expenses. He said, it's going to cost a few $100,000. He said, we'll have to get a nice retreat area, pay for everybody's flight, pay for their rooms, pay for the prasadam, everything. He said, I'll seed it. He said, I'll start it with $100,000. He said, towards this program. So he said, let's all keep in touch. He said, and we should get this going. So this is what I saw again and again with Bhakti Charu Maharaj, is his appreciation, his desire to see that all of Prabhupada's followers, particularly his godbrothers and godsisters, that somehow or other we appreciate them, give them the opportunity to do some service, whatever the situation was. And again, what I always saw was this was the way Prabhupada was. I was with Srila Prabhupada for more than 2 years. It's all Prabhupada ever saw was the service we were doing. If he saw there were difficulties, of course he would correct it. Like in the class, I think the class, not the other day, but a week or so ago, I was saying, Prabhupada called me into his room during that time 12 times, saying, where is everyone? Where are the others? And they'd be taking rest. So it wasn't that Prabhupada never corrected or never chastised, but whenever he saw that anyone was starting to drift away, he would bring them back in. So this is the quality. This is a Vaishnava. And this is what I saw with Maharaj, is he had that same, didn't see any faults in others. He just saw, these are Prabhupads. These are Prabhupada's people. They're my brothers, my sisters. And he would want to engage them in service. So, somehow or other, as we all do, just like Prabhupada, back in 1977, he left us. But of course, never left, as he said, the devotee. He never dies. He lives in his instructions. So Prabhupada gave us so many instructions, and I could see that Maharaj, he took to Prabhupada's instructions very, very sincerely, very purely. And as I appreciated, of course, he had the same, like Prabhupada, he was an aristocratic man, Maharaj. He came from a very nice family, and he had those wonderful qualities. He was very compassionate. He spoke very nicely, and you would have this natural attraction towards such a person as a great Vaishnava. His going, of course, is as any devotee when they leave, any very wonderful devotee, it's always very difficult. But they leave behind their legacy, and they leave behind their example. So that example of Maharaj for me is something that is very important, very enlivening, encouraging. And just on a personal level, he inspired me so much by his desire to always serve the devotees. Not that we just take service. This isn't our thing, accepting service. Prabhupada said you have to give back. There's something, of course, I always saw with Prabhupada. Not that we're eager that people service, but we want to give service to others. So he exemplified that very much in everything he did. And over the years, he became more and more dynamic, I think, within our ISKCON society, which makes it all the more difficult for all of us. At the same time, his compassion is there, his blessings are there, the example is there, particularly for his own disciples, of what to aspire for. So this is what a Vaishnava does. Huh? They show you everything. They show you the way. They show you all the intricacies, how to develop Krishna consciousness. And they set the example. As I said, Prabhupada, I was just reading yesterday, Prabhupada was saying, the only thing I've introduced, he said, was translating books. He says that's the one thing. Everything else, he said, I learned as a child. He said, everything I'm showing you, all the examples, everything I'm doing, he said, everything in our society, he said, I was doing from childhood. He said, as my father was training me up. Perfect Vaishnava. And as I always say, whatever level one is on, Srila Prabhupada was the most intimate servant of the Lord, and Srimati Radharani. But if you went into his room any time of the day, you would see him practicing Krishna consciousness as he showed us. You would see him chanting his rounds, giving classes, reading his books. And Prabhupada was doing this daily, reading, which every time I would go in the room, it took me a long time when I first became his servant to see him reading his books, and I would wonder, he's reading these books. But as he told me more than once, he said, he would be amazed, he said, when I read what is there. He said, I think how? He said, how did I do it? Then, of course, he said, I didn't. He said, it's coming from Krishna. It's Krishna. So he would read in that way, with that ultimate humility. Everything he did was only by the mercy of Guru and Krishna. Sometimes I would go into Prabhupada's room after class in the morning, or after breakfast, he would call me in, because particularly outside of the US, I would record the classes, because there would be in 1972, 1973, wasn't a lot of any videos going on, and even audio recordings in India and other places didn't always happen. Mayapur, I remember one day in Mayapur, he called me in his room and offered obeisances. He looked at me, he said, did you record? He said, bring it. He said, I want to hear it. He said it was a very nice class. But he would say it in such a way that you could see it was coming from Krishna. Not that he was bragging about what he did, but he himself was inspired by hearing what he had said. So this is devotee. And again, this was, I saw these things with Bhakti Charu Maharaj, like he could say everything he was doing, and then to sit at a class that I had given and afterwards say, that was just wonderful. He would become so inspired to hear from others. So this is very important to understand. That devotee, he sees everyone's doing so much service. Me, I'm just struggling a little bit to try to make some progress, some advancement in Krishna consciousness. But he sees everyone else doing such nice service. And that is the most encouraging thing. My only regret is, well, of course he's gone, that's a big regret. But the idea he had, which was a very wonderful idea to, again, in the US, bring all these devotees back together again. Because that's all it takes. As Prabhupada knew. If someone is struggling in any way, or has distanced themselves from associating with devotees, which as we know is most important activity, Prabhupada would say, is associate with devotees. not that we just by ourselves. He wanted to inspire that again, to see. And even if 1, 2 people, just like for me, he inspired me back in the 90s to take part, to get more involved. And then once you do that, it just becomes addictive. I'm very happy to be able to say a little something. There's not enough I can say about him. Again, I see so much the qualities he had, which were topmost Vaishnava qualities. So all glories to His Holiness Bhakti Charu Maharaj. Jai Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Shri Kirti Prabhu, for sharing such a wonderful memories and qualities of Shri Guru Maharaj. Like he mentioned that how he always wanted to see his god brothers, ISKCON family as one. Always he mentioned and focused how we should cooperate to work to please Srila Prabhupada. And like he never saw any fault in anyone and to bring them together. And he mentioned about how he was aristocratic like Srila Prabhupada, but at the same time most compassionate. His genuine Vaishnava qualities attracted people, and he left behind the example, which is something very important. And thanks to reminding this point that um, how he lived his exam by how he lived by his example, and now inspiring everyone through whatever standards he has set. And you mentioned about that topmost Vaishnava quality of Maharaj. So thank you very much, Shruti Kirti Prabhu. Now we are hearing from His Grace Govardhan Prabhu. So Govardhan Prabhu, born in Durban, South Africa. He first met devotees in 1982. Although attracted by their Harinams, he was reluctant to take a copy of Science of Self-Realization from them. But after reading first 60 pages, he instantly became a vegetarian and started chanting Hare Krishna. Saved by Srila Prabhupada books, Govardhan Prabhu remains connected to them to this day. He began by distributing them and now serves as the trustee of Bhaktivedanta Book Trust Africa, and as a global BPT trustee, serving as the chairman of BTG board. He is also responsible for Back to Godhead magazine, and as an active ISKCON member, he has served as co-temple president, regional secretary, and national secretary. He also served as a global duty officer with a focus on ISKCON's economy. He was initiated in 1994 by His Holiness Bhakti Chaitanya Swami. So we will be hearing the memories and service in separation from Govardhan Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरन्दस्य ज्ञानञ्जनं शलाकाय चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपा कदा मायां ददाति स्वापदान्तिकाम्। वञ्चकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्येव च पतितनां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। आजानलम्बितभुजो कनकावदातो सङ्कीर्तनिकपितरो कमलायताक्षो विश्वम्भरो द्विजवरो Yuga Dharma Palo Vande Jagat Priya Karo Karuna Ravataro. Hare Krishna. So, for those who have encountered His Holiness Srila Bhakti Charu Swami Maharaj outside of ISKCON, as a friend or some casual acquaintance or through an engagement, and those who have encountered him within ISKCON, as a disciple, an inspiring disciple, a friend, a GBC, a spiritual guide, we will all attest to the grace and love of this uniquely special personality. He was a living example, a role model of what a perfect devotee should be. He was a perfect gentleman and a perfect human being. For that reason, he was the object of our veneration. For ISKCON, our worldwide community of devotees, and most especially Maharaja's followers and his disciples, today is a very painful day. It's a very painful reminder of what we've lost, really an immeasurable loss, an irreplaceable loss, so quickly and so unexpectedly. Here we are on the first anniversary of the passing of His Holiness Srila Bhakti Charu Maharaj for what seems only a few moments ago. And we continue to endure this unbearable loss, the loss of the association of someone who exemplified pure devotional service. But expressed through this pain is a deep spiritual truth, that service in separation is indeed greater than personal service. We are cautioned that unless one is perfectly anxious to inquire about the way of perfection, that there's no necessity of approaching a spiritual master. Guru Krishna Prasada Pai Bhakti Lata Beach. It is only by the grace of Guru and Krishna that one can enter into devotional service. So there's no difference in devotional service that we engage every day in our lives in this material world and the devotional service rendered in Goloka Vrindavan. But on a spiritual platform where everything is absolute, there is no difference between that separation and meeting. Rather, one relishes the relationship more in separation than in meeting or than in union. We read in the Srimad Bhagavatam in the first canto of Arjuna's response to Yudhishthira Maharaja's questions about Lord Krishna leaving this world. Arjuna is speechless due to grief caused by separation from Lord Krishna. It's described that Arjuna's mouth and his heart had dried up. He could not speak. Tears of grief smeared his eyes. He was remembering Krishna's the many occasions he had to associate with Krishna as his well-wisher, as his benefactor, as his intimate family friend, as his chariot driver. That most intimate friend who joked with him, smiled, tolerated his offenses, and how Krishna helped him cross so many obstacles. And it's described in the Bhagavatam that he was feeling intolerable separation. Then Arjuna says, I am powerless. I am left alone. My astounding power is no longer with me. Today, as we reflect on the passing of His Holiness Srila Bhakti Charu Maharaj, many of us may feel like this. He was so personal. He helped so many of us shoulder very difficult times. He joked with us and charioted our lives in so many different ways. Today, many of us might feel that great sense of loss, unbearable loss. But knowing Maharaj, who is now in the eternal association of Lord Krishna, that Krishna, who is the reservoir of all beauty, whose moonlight face is like the drinking vessel of all the beauty of this world. Krishna's glories exceed the number of atoms on the earth, but most of all, the Lord's pressing desire is that he wants us all to come back home, back to Godhead. So knowing Maharaj, he would want us to join him and stay with him forever. We have to give up, of course. To do that, we have to give up fiddling around with material nature, become spear-tipped in advancing. And these things were very important to Maharaj, that pinpoint, focused attention on devotional service. Maharaj was very committed to uniting ISKCON, strengthening ISKCON, expanding outreach, carefully nurturing and developing sweet relationships, having the capacity to forgive, and carefully relating to each other, each devotee, with very deep respect and love. Maharaj was the epitome of these aspirations. For me, his kindness and affection was overwhelming. There is actually no way of repaying the heavy debt that we owe to the spiritual master. It's not possible. But Shastra tells us the only way to do that is to preach. Vinoda Patram. Vinoda Patram means a joker, someone who makes others laugh. Some way, someone who tries to repay the spiritual master becomes a laughing stock. It's not possible to repay the spiritual master. The only way to do it is to preach. And that is what Maharaj did every day, every hour, and that is what we should do. If we want to please Maharaj and remember him, we have to follow in his footsteps. I first met Maharaj when I was in my 20s. He immediately asked me to travel with him. I should give up university and travel with him. He said, just leave everything and travel with me. And in all the 3 decades that followed, I grew to love Maharaj and appreciate him. He never once failed to reach out to me. I felt a special bond with him. I remember how he obliged my many requests by stopping midway between Durban and Johannesburg in South Africa. That's a 600-kilometer drive. And Maharaj stopped just to have a roadside simple breakfast with me. Or how he sent a disciple to fetch me from the Charles de Gaulle airport in Paris while he was in Belgium at Radadesh, just to come and have lunch with him. Maharaj had prepared the lunch, and it was spinach and rice, and he waited for me. We eventually arrived many hours later, and Maharaj was so happy, so happy. He insisted that I freshen up, but my bags were in the car that gave me. Maharaj insisted that I use his towel, soft, wet towel that he had just used. After a shower and a sumptuous lunch feast, he arranged for me to be driven back to France. Now I ask you, who would do something like this? It's just unbelievable. That love is just completely unbelievable. On another occasion, we were at the Shri Shri Radharana temple in Durban. This was a Sunday love feast program. There was over 500 devotees there. And there's a roaring kirtan that Maharaj was leading. Then, as he went around and around in the circle, he stopped and whispered in my ears that 2 guests have arrived in the temple and that I should attend to them. Of course, the kirtan was so roaring and so absorbing that I, for a moment, was still absorbed in the kirtan. Maharaj came back to me and said, there are 2 German guests that have arrived. Can you please receive them? So I did receive them. And later on in the evening, late in the evening, Maharaj phoned to inquire about these German guests. Now, he told me, you see, they have come to their home of their eternal father and mother, and we should receive them and welcome them back. What an elevated consciousness. Such deep love and care for somebody he only noticed from the corner of his eye, who had entered the temple room during a Sunday feast program. So now that such a personality is no more physically with us, such an exalted Vaishnava to teach us, to correct us, what do we do? Srila Narottam Das Thakur asks a very important question. Chadiya Vaishnava Seva Nistara Prachara Keba, that without serving the bona fide spiritual master, who's an ideal Vaishnava, who can be delivered from the clutches of Maya? Narottam is asking, who can be delivered from the clutches of Maya? Now, the question is reiterated in the 5th canto of the Bhagavatam. Mahat Sevam Dwaram Ahu Vimukte. If one desires liberations from the clutches of Maya, one must associate with a pure devotee, Mahatma. Now the question is, who is a Mahatma? A Mahatma is somebody who engages in 24 hours a day in Krishna's service. Mahatma Seva will release one from sinful reactions. So that devotee who is Krishna Arpita Prana, that refers to the devotee who dedicates his life to serving Krishna. He is Narayan Parayana or Vasudev Parayana. The devotional path is his life and soul. Such a devotee is never afraid of going anywhere, even if it's to hell. So now, what do we do when it seems like we've lost that precious association? As long as the spiritual master is physically present, we are advised by our acharyas in the scripture that we should worship his body. But when the spiritual master leaves, the disciple should worship his instruction. Srila Prabhupada describes how a sincere disciple receives instructions from the Supersoul in the spiritual master's absence. And yes, provided that the devotee is pure-hearted, he gets instructions from the Supersoul. This sincere devotee is helped directly and indirectly by the spiritual master and the Supersoul. You would recall that incredible extract from the Srimad Bhagavatam where the Supersoul is speaking to the soul and says, "You gave up my company to pursue this world. We live together in the same heart. Although we live together for 1,000 years, we are still very far from our original home. So let's go home." So if we want to go back home, if we want to get Maharaja's association again, we have to obviously first plan to go back home and try our best to follow his instructions. Srila Bhakti Charu Maharaj was a perfect devotee, a perfect disciple, and a perfect amongst us in the age and times that we live in. He followed Srila Prabhupada's instructions without hesitation. So he was a perfect instrument, perfect role model. And it's just so remarkable to reflect just how unique and perfect Srila Bhakti Charu Maharaj was. So respectful, so eager to receive guests, so eager for our comfort, unshakable faith in Srila Prabhupada and the future of ISKCON. How he always loved and appreciated devotees, always compassionate, humble, very surrendered, so considerate to others' feelings. He was always enlivened to answer questions and expose himself in any way to advance the cause of Krishna consciousness. So, being so deeply honest, always ready to share his own realization, always empowering, personally very austere and dedicated, he never fatigued to give Krishna and the holy names to others. That's why Maharaj is so dear to so many devotees across the world. Like the sages of Naim Sharanya said to Sutta Goswami, "It's our good fortune to meet you. You are the captain of the ship. Help us cross this ocean of Kali." So it's our good fortune to have got the association and example of such an exalted Vaishnava Guru in our lifetimes. The disciple should unhesitatingly think about the instructions of the Guru and not allow himself to be disturbed by anything else. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his commentary in the Bhagavad Gita, text 41 in chapter 2, he makes the point that the order of the spiritual master is the life and substance of the disciple. life and substance of the disciple. And at this time, we can also reflect on the sacred words of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur in this regard, who made a very powerful statement. He said, "If to carry the command of the Vaishnava Guru, I have to be arrogant and brutish, or suffer eternal perdition, I am prepared to welcome such eternal damnation, and even sign a contract to that effect. I will not listen to the words of malicious persons in lieu of the command of Srila Gurudev. I will dissipate with indomitable courage and conviction the current of thoughts of the rest of the world, relying on the strength derived from the lotus feet of Sri Gurudev. I confess to this arrogance." Hare Krishna. So here we have it, the importance of carrying the command of the spiritual master. Even if we feel some handicap, some inadequacy, we've had some disagreement, we must do our best to honor the instructions given to us individually and collectively. So on this very auspicious day, on the disappearance anniversary of Srila Bhakti Charu Maharaj, I first of all offer my prostrated obeisances to each of Maharaja's disciples across the globe. You carry the hope of everything Maharaj desired and aspired for. And I offer my heartfelt gratitude and respects to my ever well-wisher, His Holiness Srila Bhakti Charu Swami Maharaj, who had unflinching devotion to Srila Prabhupada and Krishna, who came to us by Srila Prabhupada's grace and has returned again to be in the shelter of Srila Prabhupada and Lord Krishna, and who is patiently waiting for us to again join him in the association of Srila Prabhupada. Srila Bhakti Charu Swami Maharaj ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol, Hari
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Govardhan Prabhu, for netting such a wonderful qualities of Guru Maharaj. Like you mentioned about there is no difference in serving in separation or union, and you very nicely mentioned the example of Arjuna remembering Krishna. And it happened like when we are apart from each other, when we are at distance from each other, then the remembrance is increased. You mentioned about the pinpoint focus, committed to uniting people, devotees, always thinking for expanding Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON, the relationship among devotees. You are telling that there is no way to pay this debt of the spiritual master, but only offering can be preaching. We should preach on behalf of the spiritual master. And you mentioned about how unbelievable kindness and love he showered to everyone who met him. And you mentioned your example. He personally cooked and fed you. He was a perfect devotee, disciple of highest order. And we felt very fortunate that such a exalted Vaishnava was among us. He followed Srila Prabhupada without hesitation. And this is what a disciple should learn, that he should follow his spiritual master without reservation and hesitations. And finally, you mentioned about Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, that the order of the spiritual master is the life and substance of a disciple. Thank you very much, Prabhu, for reminding such wonderful instructions and lessons. Now we will be hearing from His Grace Hriday Chaitanya Prabhu. I will give a brief introduction about Prabhu. So, when he was 30 years old, Hriday Chaitanya Prabhu, a disciple of Satswarup Das Goswami, left his teaching job in 1980 in order to become a full-time member of Hare Krishna community in Amsterdam. He returned to his native Belgium, where in 1986 he took up the post of temple president at the devotee community known as Radha Des, one of the India ISKCONs most significant European establishment. And if you want to understand of Prabhu in ISKCON, then we can see that how this Radha Desh community was grown. Recognizing his leadership abilities, he became the GBC in 2002. He is also the current chairman of International GBC and as a member of the executive committee. In 2008, he began coordinating a task force for ISKCON doll project in France. Hida Chaitan Prabhu's journal assignments are Andorra, France, Gibraltar, Portugal, and Spain, and is co-journal secretary with Madhusevita Prabhu for Paris, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, and is GBC for New Mayapur. So we are very thankful for Prabhu sharing his memories. We will hear from Hridaya Chaitanya Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for allowing me to speak a few words on His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami, with whom I had a strong connection. My history is that I joined in 1980, and I went the first time to India, to Mayapur in 1986 during the festival of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. At that time, Bhagavan Prabhu was our guru, he was our GBC, and in Mayapur there was a huge festival with the 500th anniversary of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So I may have seen His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami at that time, but I did not connect with him on a personal level at that time. So 1986 was a very turbulent year, because at that time several of the 11 gurus had difficulties, and Bhagavan Prabhu, he also left in September of that year, which resulted in a whole big part of Europe with more than 1,000 initiated devotees. They were left behind. They had no leader at that time. So then naturally some devotees even reflect that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, on his 500th anniversary, he made arrangements to make some changes in ISKCON. So then 6 months after Bhagavan Prabhu left, and there was the next annual GBC meeting in Mayapur, and His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami was requested to become a GBC for the UK, a GBC for Belgium, and a GBC for Kolkata. At that time, Jagopal Prabhu, the local leader from Radha Desh, and Bhattu Gopal Prabhu, they both were in Mayapur at that time, and they briefly met with Maharaj, and they came back with a message that Bhakti Charu Swami is going to be our GBC. He is more like a sadhu type of a person, and his main service until now has been translating Srila Prabhupada's books to Bengali and preaching. So then maybe 1 month, maybe 1.5 months after Gor Purnim in 1987, His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami came to Belgium, came to Radha Desh for the first time, and he immediately did an effort to get to know the devotees. He was open to speak with everybody, anybody. He remembered their name, their connections. He was carefully listening to them. He was establishing a friendship with everybody. And he was also very conscious at that time that in his dealings with the devotees, that these devotees had been hurt by their guru leaving them. So sometimes he even got like some, you can say, challenging questions. And but Maharaj was always very, very compassionate and forgiving, and he dealt with them in a loving, in a very kind way. He would give nice classes, and sometimes before the class he would sing a sweet Vaishnava songs from the previous acharyas, and once in a while he would also announce at the time of the class, today I will cook for the devotees, so that and due to his previous stay in Germany as a university student, he knew what the Western devotees would like, such as spaghetti with yellow cheese, or pizza, ravioli, things like that. And whenever there was a devotee in some difficulty or something that happened, he would immediately inquire, he would immediately be concerned for that devotee and hear attentively the anguish the devotee went through. And then he would go out of his way to support that devotee, help that devotee, like that. Since Maharaj was Srila Prabhupada's personal servant in the last year Srila Prabhupada was on the planet, he was also imbibed with Srila Prabhupada's mood of compassion and personal example. He was comparing ISKCON to a big boat, and he was encouraging the devotees on behalf of Srila Prabhupada to never leave ISKCON. Whatever happens, never leave ISKCON, and to cooperate with each other and encourage one another in Krishna consciousness. That was an important mantra that His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami repeated, reminded the devotees regularly, that there will always be difficulties in this world, that's inherent with this world, but never leave ISKCON. Because ISKCON is not different from Srila Prabhupada. ISKCON is Srila Prabhupada. So he was stressing that very much. Maharaj was a real Vaishnava, is a real Vaishnava, and his behavior was outstanding. He was like the embodiment of, you can say, of Vaishnava etiquette. He was teaching that also. In Mayapur, I had the opportunity to serve as a member of the Mayapur Executive Board, the MEB we call it, and His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami was a senior member of that board, together with Jayapataka Swami, Gopal Krishna Goswami, and some other devotees. So when Maharaj came to Mayapur for these meetings, either from Ujjain or from any other place, then when he met his godbrothers or the local leaders, he would give them a big hug, full of love. It was always a happy meeting, I personally cherished very much this kind of exchanges with Maharaj. From the beginning, His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami was always like a father for me. Whenever there was a dispute between different parties, he would always try to bring the parties together. He would be like an ideal mediator, you can say. He would keep the ISKCON family together, and he would create a spirit of forgiving and keep Krishna in the center. You could also see that Maharaj, in a mood of hospitality and service to his god brothers and other senior devotees, he would use his facilities in Mayapur to invite devotees to take lunch prasadam together. Sometimes few devotees, sometimes 10, sometimes 15, sometimes 20 devotees would be invited. And he had an excellent team of disciples, with one or two amongst them were really good cooks. And they would cook excellent prasadam, either Bengali dishes or Italian dishes were served nicely, very nicely, and very attentively also, to the full satisfaction of the invited devotees, the invited guests. Besides looking after many disciples, His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami, he established from scratch, and actually in a very short time span, few years, he established a very beautiful temple project in Ujjain. He was also, even up to recently, teaching courses in the GBC college, giving seminars, organized regularly gatherings with his devotees. He was also GBC for South Africa, Kolkata, Mayapur, etc. And he was a very inspiring and accomplished traveling preacher, always speaking about the glories of Srila Prabhupada and Krishna. So I'm dearly missing his association. His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami Ki Jai. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. So, thank you very much, His Grace Hridaya Chaitanya Prabhu, for sharing your memories. Like you discussed about how he was so actively involved in uniting ISKCON, just like ISKCON was passing through difficult phase, and he took the lead with other devotees and worked for uniting it. He mentioned about how he used to come to other days, and he used to ask them that I will cook and I will serve you. And he knows perfectly how to please the devotees by feeding them prasad. He mentioned about his important mantra that he repeatedly chanted: never leave ISKCON, cooperate and encourage each other. There will always be difficulties, but never leave ISKCON. He mentioned about that how he is the embodiment of Vaishnava etiquette. He not only taught, but he practically showed through his example. And you mentioned about that how whenever he used to come to Mayapur, he used to meet devotees, and his big hug full of love, uh, just like a father. Whenever there is a dispute, he always tried to act as an ideal mediator. he was having the spirit of forgiving and keep Krishna in center. You mentioned about his mood of hospitality and how he used to invite different devotees to his personal facility and used to serve them with his excellent devotee team who used to cook prasadam very attentively and used to serve with full satisfaction. And at last you mentioned about that how Jan project that is a landmark project in ISKCON. Like in 9 months, such a big temple was manifested. So thank you very much, Prabhu, for sharing your memories with His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami Guru Maharaj. Thank you very much. Now we will hearing from His Grace Shureshwar Prabhu. So I will just give a brief introduction about Shureshwar Prabhu. In 1970, Sureshwar Prabhu joined the Hare Krishna movement in Boston, USA. Over the years, Sureshwar Prabhu's service has revolved around Prabhupada's books. As a young brahmachari, he distributed books. From 1976 to 1980, he served as the indexer for the North American BBT in Los Angeles. From 1980-1993, he served at Gita Nagari and wrote several articles for Back to Godhead magazine. And then he rendered various services. Since 2001, Sureshwar Prabhu has served as the main book distributor and class giver at New Navdeep, Honolulu, Hawaii. Since 2008, he has been serving half the year in Hawaii and other half in Sridham, Mayapur, where he has been studying and teaching at Mayapur Institute of Higher Education. He currently coordinates MIHE's Orientation Days and Bhakti Vaibhav Course Module 2, Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4 to 6, serving as a teacher and writer. So we will hear from His Grace Sureshwar Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, my name is Sureshwar Das, the creator and presenter of the Founder Acharya seminar series. So on this bittersweet occasion of remembering His Holiness Bhakti Charu Maharaj, I'd like to focus on Maharaja's contribution to our ISKCON having a more Founder Acharya-centered culture. I first met Maharaj in 1987 in Vrindavan, India, when he was teaching at the first VIHE semester, the Vaishnav etiquette course. And that was a wonderful experience. But I really got to know him online when I started hearing him speak about Srila Prabhupada's unique position as our Founder Acharya later on in the 90s. And also in the 90s, I spent about a year off and on in and around Udupi, India, the seat of the Madhva Sampradaya. And by then, ISKCON had more or less recovered from the zonal Acharya debacle of many gurus imitating Prabhupada's position as Founder Acharya. So we were moving away from what I like to call Dikshism, which means the extreme focus on the Diksha Guru, to so much that we obscure the Founder Acharya. So anyway, but then the reaction to that was Ritvikism, which was the polar opposite. So I was hearing Maharaj talk about Prabhupada's position as Founder Acharya, and it really resonated with me and what I had experienced in Udupi, because I could see the Madhvas had a real good focus on their Founder Acharya for hundreds of years. And that's how they had survived over the centuries. And they were very respectful toward their Diksha Gurus and their Shiksha Gurus, but they were finding their foundational relationship and their core identity with their Founder Acharya, Sripad Madhvacharya. So in the early 2000s, when I went to Mayapur for the first time in 25 years, I met Maharaj there. And as soon as I saw him, I went up to him and I said, Maharaj, would you please teach a seminar on Srila Prabhupada's position as founder Acharya? I think would really help our society. And he looked at me, he remembered me from the course he had taught in 87 in Kartik in Vrindavan, and he said, let's teach it together. I was thinking, what? Me? Who am I to teach a seminar on this? He's the man, he's the one, he knows it better than me. But that's Maharaj. He's always the empowerer, always the inviter, the encourager. So we did do a little bit of an impromptu seminar. It wasn't advertised much, it wasn't planned. And we sat down and we just discussed together Srila Prabhupada's position in front of a room full of devotees. And then we bid each other goodbye after the festival. It was the spring, the Mayapur festival. And then I didn't see him again for several years. It was 2012. And by then I had developed a whole seminar series based on Prabhupada's position as founder Acharya. And I met him in 2012 in Mayapur again, and by then he had become the co-chair of a GBC committee called Srila Prabhupada's Position. And when I told him that I had created a seminar series, he said, oh, wonderful. You must take this all over the world. This is very important. And then later he came to Hawaii, where I was based at the time, and he was visiting. He was actually not well, and he was recuperating from some illness. And he very humbly sat in on a session of my one seminar session. And after the session, he said, this is really important. You must take this all over the world. And I'll give you some hints. I'll give you some pointers. And he did, actually. There's one lesson in the seminar where I teach a section about Narottam Das Thakur being the only Diksha disciple of Lokanath Goswami, and how Lokanath had written a song, actually, glorifying Rupa Goswami. And there's one stanza in the song where Narottam says, "When will my Lokanath, Prabhu Lokanath, when will my Prabhu Lokanath take me with him to the lotus feet of Srila Rupa Goswami?" So think about that. Narottam is the only disciple, the only child, so to speak. Narottam is of Lokanath Goswami. And yet he's asking his dear Diksha Guru to take him with him to the lotus feet of their, so to speak, founder Acharya, of the Vishwa Vaishnava Raj Sabha, who was Srila Rupa Goswami. So, over the years, as I was traveling the ISKCON world, Maharaj, I would see him in Mayapur, he would ask me how it's going. I would say, by your mercy, Maharaj, I mean, you're the one that really empowered me to do this. So, thank you so much. And then, of course, let's see, the last time I saw him was 2020 in Mayapur. And he was the same encouraging self. No, 2019. That's right. Was it 2020? Yeah, 2020 actually. And that's when COVID was coming on. And, we're still pretty far from having a truly founder Acharya-centered culture. I mean, we're doing a lot better than we did, during the zonal Acharya years. And we've recovered from Ritvikism, the reaction. But to have everyone really foundationally identify with our founder Acharya as their core identity, their foundational relationship, that's a major cultural shift, and we're still working in that. So, just before Maharaj passed away, as you know, he came to Florida. And it kind of reminded me, as people were asking him, why are you going to America where COVID is on the rampage? And Maharaj very heroically said, because the devotees need me there for the project and the land. With the cows and Varnashram, and I have to go. I can't hide. So it was like Prabhupada coming to America at such an advanced age, taking all risk for his health. He had 2 heart attacks on the boat. He had no friends, no money, no contacts. He was just rich with Krishna consciousness. So Maharaj also was taking a risk by coming to America. And of course, he very tragically did catch COVID, and we're all, deeply missing his presence because he's such a founder Acharya-centered presence in ISKCON. So I think my message to you all as dear friends and followers is that whatever relationship you had and still have in Vani with Maharaj, think about your contribution to Prabhupada's mission. And because he would just be encouraging you in what you want to do for Prabhupada's mission, because it is Prabhupada's mission in the service of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So that's the message. We're remembering him on this bittersweet occasion. Bitter because we're missing him. Sweet because we know he's with Srila Prabhupada, continuing the mission. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Bhakti Charu Maharaja ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Sri Prabhu, for sharing. You told that how in 1987 you met as known as Bhakti Charu Swami Maharaj at VIHE, giving seminar on this, teaching this VIHE semester, and you was very much influenced by the seminar on Srila Prabhupada's position as founder Acharya, because at that time, there was overemphasis on Diksha Gurus, and due to that, the position of Srila Prabhupada was eclipsed. And you mentioned about that how Maharaj inspired you to work on this series of seminars, lectures on the founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada as founder Acharya, and he himself sat in the class and heard and gave feedback. So thank you very much, Prabhu, for sharing. Now we would be having our last speaker, His Grace Devikinandan Prabhu from Singapore. So I will give a brief introduction about Prabhu. His Grace Devikinandan Prabhu is a senior disciple of His Holiness Mahavishnu Goswami Maharaj. Prabhu took up Krishna consciousness through the pages of Srimad Bhagavatam in Singapore in 1983 and met His Holiness in 1989. Taking initiation from Maharaj in 1994, Prabhu has since been one of the Maharaj's most confidential servants. Prabhu travels with Maharaj. Prabhu is also an expert preacher of Srimad Bhagavatam and a wonderful Kirtan leader. Many have taken to Krishna consciousness just by hearing his Kirtans. On top of all these, he is also leading the congregation of devotees in Singapore. He was instrumental in setting up an ISKCON center there. Through Prabhu's efforts, university preaching has also grown phenomenally in Singapore. Many university students have enthusiastically taken up to Krishna consciousness. He, as a responsibilities in ISKCON, is a member of Affiliates Committee, Strategic Planning, assisting His Holiness Kavichandra Swami, Devotee Care, Strategic Planning. He coordinates and oversees administration and development of Krishna consciousness in Singapore with GBC through His Holiness Kavichandra Swami Maharaj as a GBC Singapore. He is currently a practicing lawyer from Singapore and has been in ISKCON since 1983. He is also a global duty officer for legal affairs and member of GBC nomination committee. He also serves as zonal supervisor for ISKCON Singapore and MVT trustee. So we will hear from His Grace Devikinandan Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Jai Krishna. Can start. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Sorry, we got some technical issue with this video. We will play it tomorrow. We will be here. We will hear from His Holiness Hari Vilas Maharaj. I will give a brief introduction about Maharaj. Maharaj met Srila Prabhupada in 1969 in Paris. By this time, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, he moved to temple in London, but replaced in December 1969, and later he returned to Paris and opened the first temple in Paris. He was initiated in June 1970 and became the temple president. He started first temple in Paris in 1971 in France. Maharaj started Middle Eastern BBT between 1981 to 1988 and contributed a lot in book translation and publication. His Holiness Hari Vilas Maharaj has been a member of GBC since 1988 and contributed a lot in various ways. Maharaj is based at Seattle and leading Seattle temple since early 1990. He has built a vibrant community of devotees and one of the most flourishing temple in the USA. He started cow protection, prasadam distribution in food trucks during this COVID time. He is a dear friend of His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami Maharaj. In testament his true leadership, we would have about 1,000 people attend Sunday feast every week, and about more than 20,000 people come celebrate Janmashtami festival. So we will hear from His Holiness Hari Vilas Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutave Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namani Namaste Saraswati Devi Guruvani Pacharani Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskati Desatara. Srila Prabhupada Patita Pavana Ki Jai Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vindam. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. I feel very honored to be able to speak about my dear and dearest friend, Bhakti Charu Maharaj. I've known him since he was a newly initiated sannyasi, and he came to visit me when I was living in France, and we became very good friends right from the beginning. And he told me about his project of translating all of Srila Prabhupada's books into Bengali. And at that time, I was very fortunate to have a very successful business, and I was donating large amounts of money to different devotees who were engaged in translating Prabhupada's books in foreign languages. And when Bhakti Charu told me what he was doing, I was so happy to hear that, and I gave him a large donation. And as the years passed by, we were always, whenever we met, he was very, very, let's say, kind to me, and always a friend, and full of warm and inviting exhortations so that I could, share prasadam with him, and we would talk intimately. And I always felt as if that I have a very special friend in this world, and his name is Bhakti Charu Maharaj. And of course, just his name is indicative of his character. So Bhakti Charu Maharaj. Charu means beautiful, and Bhakti means devotion. So Prabhupada chose just the right name for him. That is, that he is beautiful by virtue of his devotion to Guru and Krishna. So what a wonderful name he received, and he lived up to that name's, let's say, high level of Krishna consciousness, because he was always engaged in the service of Srila Prabhupada. He was always lovingly speaking about Prabhupada, and of course of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the first time he met Srila Prabhupada was in sometime in January 1977, and soon, in a matter of, I would say, 7 to 8 months, he received first and second initiation, and then he received also sannyas. It happened very quickly. In March 1977, he was initiated first and second at the Gaur Purnima festival in Mayapur, India, and at the Snana Yatra ceremony in Vrindavan in June, probably in June 1977, he received sannyas. This is amazing, because Prabhupada recognized him very quickly to be an exceptional person who would be very instrumental in spreading Krishna consciousness. And there are a lot of similarities between Bhakti Charu Maharaj and Raghunatha Goswami. Raghunath Bhatta Goswami also was very young when he met Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And in the first meeting, the Lord embraced him, recognizing him. And he met him in Jagannath Puri. And very soon, the Lord took him under his own tutelage, and they spent 8 months together, very similar to Bhakti Charu Maharaj, who met Prabhupada in January 1977, and by June 1977, he had received first, second initiation and sannyas. So this is a remarkable, resemblance. And in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Untitled Chapter 13, verse 117, it says, after 8 months, when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu bade farewell to Raghunath Bhatta, the Lord flatly forbade him to marry. Do not marry, the Lord said. And in the purport, Prabhupada explains that Raghunath Das Goswami, or Raghunath Bhattacharya, had become a greatly advanced devotee while still unmarried. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu could see this, and therefore he advised him not to begin the process of material sense gratification. Marriage is a concession for people who are unable to control their senses. Raghunatha, however, being an advanced devotee of Krishna, naturally had no desire for sense gratification. Therefore, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu advised him not to enter the bondage of marriage. Generally, a person cannot make much advancement in spiritual consciousness if he is married. He becomes attached to his family and is prone to sense gratification. Thus, his spiritual advancement is very slow or almost nil. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said to Raghunath Bhatta, when you return home, serve your aged father and mother, who are devotees, and try to study Srimad Bhagavatam from a pure Vaishnava who has realized God. And in the purport, Prabhupada writes, one should note how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, advised Raghunath Bhattacharya to learn Srimad Bhagavatam. He advised him to understand Srimad Bhagavatam not from professional men, but from a real Bhagavata, a devotee. He also advised Raghunath Bhatta to serve his mother and father because they were both Lord Chaitanya's devotees. Anyone who wishes to advance in Krishna consciousness must try to serve the devotees of Krishna. As Narottam Dasa Thakur says, Chadura Vaishnava Seva Parecha Nistara Parecha Keva. Without serving a self-realized Vaishnava without serving a self-realized Vaishnava, no one has ever been released from a materialistic way of life. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would have never advised Raghunath Bhatta to serve ordinary parents, but since his parents were Vaishnavas, the Lord advised him to serve them. One may ask, why shouldn't ordinary parents be served? As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 5.5.18, Guru nasyat swajano nasasyat, pita nasasyat janani nasasyat, daivi na tatsyat na patischa syam namocha vedla samupeta mrityum. One who cannot deliver his dependent from the path of birth and death should never become a spiritual master, a relative, a father, or a mother, or a worshipable demigod, nor should such a person become a husband. And then Prabhupada writes, everyone naturally gets a father and mother at the time of birth, but the real father and mother are those who can release their offspring from the clutches of imminent death. This is possible only for parents advanced in Krishna consciousness. Therefore, any parents who cannot enlighten their offspring in Krishna consciousness cannot be accepted as a real father and mother. The following verse from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1.2.200 confirms the uselessness of serving ordinary parents. Lokiki vaidiki vapi ya kriya kriyate mune. Hari Sevanam Kuleva Sakarya Bhaktin Itchata. One should perform only those activities either worthy or prescribed by Vedic rules and regulations which are favorable for the cultivation of Krishna consciousness. So, why am I reading this? Because not only Prabhupada recommended that Bhakti Charu Maharaj never get married, in other words, giving him sannyas, so he would never get married, but he also told him to carefully study Srimad Bhagavatam with the help of bona fide devotees. So not only did he study with the help of bona fide devotees, because he was directly in contact with Prabhupada, who asked him to translate the entire entire Srimad Bhagavatam into Bengali, and Prabhupada was carefully monitoring him during that period when he was engaged in doing that. So here we see two very close, let's say, parallels of the life of Raghunatha Goswami and Bhakti Charu Maharaj. And then Prabhupada continues, he says, concerning the study of Srimad Bhagavatam, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu clearly advises that one avoid hearing from a non-Vaishnava professional reciter. In this connection, Sanatana Goswami quotes a verse from the Padma Purana. Avaishnava mukho grinam putam hari katam butam shavanam naiva kartavyam sarpotis tam yata paya. No one should hear or take lessons from a person who is not a Vaishnava. Even if he speaks about Krishna, such a lesson should not be accepted, for it is like milk touched by the lips of a serpent. End of quote. Nowadays, it is fashionable to observe Bhagavad Saptaha and hear Srimad Bhagavatam from persons who are anything but advanced devotees or self-realized souls. In other words, hearing from persons who are not self-realized souls. There are even many Mayavadis who read Srimad Bhagavatam to throngs of people. Many Mayavadis have recently begun reciting Srimad Bhagavatam in Vrindavana. And because they can present the Bhagavatam with word jugglery, twisting the meaning by grammatical tricks, materialistic persons who go to Vrindavana as a matter of spiritual fashion like to hear them. All this is clearly forbidden by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We should note carefully that since these Mayavadis cannot personally know the meaning of Srimad Bhagavatam, they can never deliver others by reciting it. On the other hand, an advanced devotee of the Lord is free from material bondage. He personifies Srimad Bhagavatam in life and action. Therefore, we advise that anyone who wants to learn Srimad Bhagavatam must approach such a realized soul. So, again, there's a parallel. Lord Chaitanya tells Raghunatha Goswami not to hear Bhagavatam from a speculator or a Mayavadi or a non-devotee, but he should learn from a pure Vaishnava who has realized God. So, who else would be such a person as Srila Prabhupada himself, who monitored Bhakti Charu Maharaj's translation and of Bhagavatam, Prabhupada's rendition of the translation of Bhagavatam and the purports that Srila Prabhupada wrote. So, again, Shadya Vaishnava Seva Nistara Prayacha Keba. That is, without serving a self-realized Vaishnava, no one has ever been released from the materialistic way of life. So we see that Prabhupada personally took Bhakti Charu Maharaj under his personal guidance and therefore, and gave him this wonderful name that one is beautiful by virtue of devotional service, and definitely Bhakti Charu is definitely that. And in this way, Bhakti Charu Maharaj dedicated his whole life to serving the mission of Lord Chaitanya and through the instructions of Srila Prabhupada. So if we quickly hear all his accomplishments, you'll see that everything he did was to please Prabhupada and Lord Chaitanya or Krishna. He also produced the whole life story of Prabhupada in video that was televised throughout India, and hundreds and thousands of people saw it, and they're continuing to see it today. and he built a beautiful temple in Ujjain dedicated to Prabhupada and Krishna. He also started other projects in Mayapur and in the United States, and he was always engaged in encouraging the devotees to be sincere followers of Prabhupada and Krishna. So that is the sign of a remarkable Vaishnava who has dedicated his life completely to the service of the Lord. This is also explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 5, and verse number 17, where Srila Prabhupada says, "No one can create anything without the sanction of the Lord, since everyone sees according to his ability or his own ability. This ability is also awarded by the Lord according to one's willingness to render service unto the Lord. One must therefore be voluntarily willing to render service unto the Lord, and thus the Lord will empower the doer in proportion to his surrender unto the lotus feet of the Lord." Well, this is basically paraphrase of the verse, "Yetamam prapadyante tam stitaiva bhajamyaham mamavart manavartante manusya partasarvasaha," where Krishna says to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, "As all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Everyone follows my path in all respects, O son of Pritha Arjuna." So in the Srimad Bhagavatam introduction on page 17, Prabhupada writes, "The Lord responds to the proportion of the devotee's love for him." And again, he wrote to Tejas Prabhu, May 20th, 1970, and he says, "The Lord will reveal himself to you in proportion to your sincere efforts to satisfy him only." So this is again a description of Bhakti Charu Maharaj. He completely surrendered to Prabhupada very quickly and dedicated the rest of his life unfailingly to the service of Prabhupada and Krishna. And therefore, for such a surrendered soul, the Lord reveals himself proportionately to the surrender and the service of the devotee. So in this way, Bhakti Charu Maharaj was empowered by Prabhupada and Krishna to perform amazing feats in their service. This is a practical demonstration of this verse, 4th chapter, 11th verse. And in that verse, it says, in the transcendental world, it says, "But Krishna is fully realized only by his pure devotees. Consequently, Krishna is the object of everyone's realization, and thus anyone and everyone is satisfied according to one's desire to have Krishna or serve Krishna. In the transcendental world also, Krishna reciprocates with his pure devotees in the transcendental attitude, just as the devotee wants him. One devotee may want Krishna as Supreme Master, another as his personal friend, another as his son, and still another as his lover. Krishna awards all the devotees equally according to their different intensities of love for him. In the material world, the same reciprocations of feelings are there, and they are equally exchanged by the Lord with the different types of worshippers. The pure devotees both here and in the transcendental abode associate with him in person and are able to render personal service of the Lord and thus derive transcendental bliss in his loving service." So this is a description of Bhakti Charu Maharaj, who completely surrendered to Prabhupada and completely dedicated himself to glorifying Krishna and spreading the glories of Krishna all over the world. He made disciples in many parts of the world, in India, in the United States, in Europe, in Russia, in Australia, in North America, South America. He was a Parivrajikacharya, a transcendental personality who went anywhere and everywhere. And because he was completely surrendered, Vachivegam, Manasakota Vegam, Jiva Vegam, Vidara Vegam, Etam Vegam, Yor Vishaheta Derab, Sarvam Apivam Pritivim Nasisyat. he can go anywhere and everywhere and inspire people to become devotees. So, and then plus he started projects that are continuing today, just as Prabhupada did, and all with the purpose of pleasing Guru and Krishna. That is the secret of success, when you please your spiritual master and you please Krishna. This is further explained in the Bhagavad Gita. Yetu savari karmani mai sanyasayat matpara ananya maya vijogena mam vyayanta upasate te samaham samudartam mrityu samsara sagarat bhavani nachirat partha mai avesita chetasam. But those who worship me, giving up all their activities unto me, and being devoted to me without deviation, engage in devotional service, and always meditating upon me, meaning Krishna, having fixed their minds upon me, O son of Pritha or Arjuna, for them I am the swift deliverer from the ocean of birth and death. So this again has very significant reference to Bhakti Charu Maharaj. Let's hear what Prabhupada says, and then I will express my very intimate feelings for Bhakti Charu Maharaj. It is explicitly stated here that the devotees are very fortunate to be delivered very soon from material existence by the Lord. In pure devotional service, one comes to the realization that God is great and that the individual soul is subordinate to Him. His duty, therefore, is to render service to the Lord, and if he does not, then he will render service to Maya. As stated before, the Supreme Lord can be appreciated only by devotional service. Therefore, one should be fully devoted. One should fix his mind fully on Krishna in order to achieve him. One should work only for Krishna. It does not matter in what kind of work one engages, but that work should be done only for Krishna. That is the standard of devotional service. The devotee does not desire any achievement other than pleasing the Supreme Personality of Godhead. His life's mission is to please Krishna, and he can sacrifice everything for Krishna's satisfaction, just as Arjuna did in the battle of Kurukshetra. The process is very simple. One can devote himself in his occupation and engage at the same time in chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Such transcendental chanting attracts the devotee to the personality of Godhead. In other words, the more we engage in chanting the holy names of the Lord sincerely, for the pleasure of the Lord, the more we become attracted to Krishna, because we are constantly hearing about Krishna's transcendental qualities that are unparalleled. No one can equal or surpass Krishna. Everyone is subordinate to Krishna. And Krishna's pure devotee can deliver Krishna to even the lowest person in existence by their mercy. So in this way, we see that Prabhupada delivered Krishna to Bhakti Charu Maharaj very quickly, recognizing his qualities, gave him all the initiations to pummeled him right to the top of Krishna consciousness, preaching around the world. And Bhakti Charu Maharaj never let go of the baton, never let go of that great benediction that he received from Prabhupada, and expanded the preaching of Krishna consciousness all over the world, just as Prabhupada did, and encouraged devotees. And he was actually a dear friend of many, many devotees, not just myself, but many, many other devotees who considered him a very close, very intimate, and very advanced devotee from that helped them savor their Krishna consciousness and expand and dedicate themselves to spreading this movement throughout the world. So, therefore, the Supreme Lord herein promises that without delay he will deliver a pure devotee thus engaged from the ocean of material existence. Te samaham samudarta mrityu samsara sagara. So, I can safely say that Prabhupada did this for Bhakti Charu Maharaj. He delivered him very swiftly. After his years of dedication to him, he delivered him and took him back to Godhead with him. The Supreme Lord herein promises that without delay, he will deliver a pure devotee thus engaged from the ocean of material existence. Those who are advanced in yoga practice can willfully transfer the soul to whatever planet they like by the yoga process, and others take the opportunity in various ways. But as far as the devotee is concerned, it is clearly stated here that the Lord himself takes him. The devotee does not need to wait to become very experienced in order to transfer himself to the spiritual sky. In the Varaha Purana, this verse appears, Nayami Paraman Stanam Archir Adigatim Vina. Garuda Skandam Arubhya Yatecham Anivaritaha. The purport of this verse is that a devotee does not need to practice Astanga Yoga in order to transfer his soul to the spiritual planets. The responsibility is taken by the Supreme Lord himself. He clearly states here that he himself becomes the deliverer. A child is completely cared for by his parents, and thus his position is secure. Similarly, a devotee does not need to endeavor to transfer himself by yoga practice to other planets. Rather, the Supreme Lord, by his great mercy, comes at once, riding on his bird carrier Garuda, and at once delivers the devotee from material existence. Although a man who has fallen in the ocean may struggle very hard and may be very expert in swimming, he cannot save himself. But if someone comes and picks him up from the water, then he is easily rescued. Similarly, the Lord picks up the devotee from his material existence. One simply has to practice the easy process of Krishna consciousness and fully engage himself in devotional service. Any intelligent man should always prefer the process of devotional service to all other paths. So, from the Narayana Shastra, this is confirmed. The purport of this verse, Yavai Sadhana Sampati, is that one should not engage in the different processes of fruitive activity or cultivate knowledge by the mental speculative process. One who is devoted to the Supreme Personality can attain all the benefits derived from other yogic processes, speculation, rituals, sacrifices, charities, etc. That is the specific benediction of devotional service. Simply by chanting the holy name of Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, a devotee of the Lord can approach the supreme destination easily and happily, but this destination cannot be approached by any other process of religion. The conclusion is of Bhagavad Gita, stated in the 18th chapter, Sarvadharmam Parityaja, Mamekam Saranam Vraja, Aham Tvam Sarva Papebhyo, Mokshisyami Mahasuchaha. One should give up all other processes of self-realization and simply execute devotional service in Krishna consciousness. That will enable one to reach the highest perfection of life. There is no need for one to consider the sinful actions of his past life, because the Supreme Lord fully takes charge of him. Therefore, one should not futilely try to deliver himself in spiritual realization. Let everyone take shelter of the Supreme Omnipotent Godhead, Krishna. That is the highest perfection of life. So Bhakti Charu Maharaj is an example of this. He went as a young man to Europe and to Germany and to get education. But that is not really education. That is learning to be a vishayi, or a sense gratifier in the material world. And Bhakti Charu Maharaj understood that even before he met Prabhupada, that he did not really get education. He just got a training how to make money, and the goal of it is sense gratification. So everyone that's Microsoft certified or expert in C++ or JavaScript and is capable of getting a job in Amazon or Microsoft or Twitter or Facebook or all these different companies, Google, that is not real education. That's simply learning how to make money to spend for sense gratification, and that'll keep a person in the material world. The real example is Bhakti Charu Maharaj. He didn't use that education that he got in Germany for sense gratification. he started to look for a bona fide spiritual master, and by his great fortune, he met Srila Prabhupada, he met the devotees and Srila Prabhupada, and he was immediately taken under the protection of Srila Prabhupada, who recognized his exceptional qualities, and quickly he was transformed into a genuine devotee by associating with the purest devotee, Srila Prabhupada, and he took up the process of Krishna consciousness and spread it like Srila Prabhupada all over the world. So we see that the greatest education is Srimad Bhagavatam, heard from a bona fide devotees, not from speculators and Mayavadis. And real education is Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, carefully read and studied under the tutelage of bona fide devotees, page by page, verse by verse. That is real education. The other education that we get in the material world is all about how to make money to engage in sense gratification. And that is a perfect ticket to take birth again and start all over in the cycle of birth and death through the 8,400,000 species of life that we already went through to get to the human form of body. And if we waste the human experience cultivating mundane knowledge in universities and high schools and middle schools and elementary schools and preschool, we will go back into the cycle of birth and death and start all over again. It's a hopeless cycle that leads to failure. But the real cycle that leads to success is first developing a little faith and appreciation of devotees, and then associating with devotees and learning from devotees the absolute importance of bona fide shiksha and diksha initiation. And then under the tutelage of bona fide devotees and spiritual master who was given Harinam in the first initiation, one gets rid of all their anarthas, all their bad habits, and then they develop strong faith, not simply appreciation, but very strong faith, and with that, and functioning with that strong faith, and having shed their bad qualities, and taking up Krishna conscious transcendental life, they develop a taste for hearing and chanting. And from that taste for hearing and chanting, that ruchi, they develop anashakti, real attachment to Krishna and Krishna consciousness and devotee association and sankirtan and preaching and prasadam and all these wonderful things. And it's basically transcendental life. And then they become they begin to feel the absolute ecstasy of chanting Hare Krishna, not just a little bit, but constantly. And that is the previous stage right before pure love of God. So this is the process of Krishna consciousness. This is real success. This is the real life that we should aspire for. Not being Microsoft certified, but we should be Prabhupada certified by hearing regularly Prabhupada's translation and purports of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, which he distilled from all the great acharyas and ultimately from Krishna himself, the speaker of Bhagavad Gita, and the great devotees such as Goswami and others who spoke Bhagavad Gita to persons like Yudhisthira Maharaj and Parikshit Maharaj and so forth. This is real education. Everything else is junk. It's not education. It's misleading. And now, when you have a bona fide spiritual master and he has gone back to Godhead, your duty as a disciple is to always worship and praise the spiritual master at least 3 times a day. Once you perform, one should remember the spiritual master and offer obeisances to him, and one should always strive to please the spiritual master, because the spiritual master is not dead. He simply left a material body that is useless, and has assumed his actual eternal spiritual body and his eternal spiritual relationship to Krishna and to Guru and Krishna. So therefore, everything is alive, everything is dynamic, everything is progressive in spiritual life. And if you remain faithful to your spiritual master, if you're always remembering your spiritual master's instructions and letting them be the guide in your life and the inspiration in your life, you will also experience the same yetamam papadyante tam statava bhajamyaham mamavartante manushya partha sarvasaha. You will also experience transcendental relationship with your Gurudev and Krishna and all other bona fide devotees and go back to Godhead. So thank you very much. Please remember these points, meditate on them, and make your life a complete success in transcendental Krishna consciousness. Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Maharaj, for sharing such a wonderful pastime teachings, relating it with the life and qualities of His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami Guru Maharaj. And you narrated the pastime of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Sri Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami. And you drawn a parallel between life of Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami and Srila Bhakti Charu Swami Guru Maharaj. You told the meaning that how the name Bhakti Charu perfectly fit on the personality of His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami Guru Maharaj, that how he was very expert in performing devotional services. Srila Prabhupada himself gave him sannyas, means himself gave him sannyas, personally asked him for sannyas. Once someone telling that Prabhupada regarding sannyas of Bhakti Charu Swami Guru Maharaj, so Prabhupada told that if he fall, he will fall in Sattva Guna only. So this you told about Bhakti Charu Swami Guru Maharaj, and you told that how he was completely surrendered to Srila Prabhupada. And accordingly, Srila Prabhupada empowered him to do wonderful things, wonderful services for his and Krishna's pleasure. Thank you, Maharaj, for sharing. So with this, today we are at the end of our session, and tomorrow we'll be meeting, hearing from different senior God brothers and leaders in ISKCON. Tomorrow at 8 a.m. we'll be hearing from His Holiness Bhanu Swami Maharaj, and in the evening from 5 to 7 we'll have a series of speakers. His Holiness Prabhupada Swami Maharaj, His Grace Praghosh Prabhu, His Grace Panchagaud Prabhu, His Grace Satdhanya Prabhu, His Grace His Holiness Jananand Swami Maharaj, His Grace Rompa Swami Maharaj, His Holiness Hirdayanand Swami Maharaj. So tomorrow we will be hearing from all these leaders. Thank you very much for joining today. Hare Krishna. Jai Shri Prabhupada ki Jai. His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami Maharaj Tirobhav Mahotsava ki Jai. Gaur Premanande. Hari Hari Bol. Mistake.